division. Revenue division 1, revenue division 2. In revenue division, well, obviously, that means they're going to be able to generate revenue. They'll also have their own costs. But hopefully you set it up so that revenue is greater than cost and they make some sort of, profit, income, whatever you want to call it. So the revenue divisions are the ones that are going to generate the profit for the company because they're the ones that generate the revenue, that bring, the income in. But what happens in a company is these revenue divisions can't do this all on their own. They have support. Support divisions, though, they don't generate their own revenue. All they generate is cost. Yes, we were concerned if we were evaluating the support division, their controlling of costs. But we can say, okay, well, this division has got a negative income, so let's get rid of it. Well, no, because it's supporting these divisions. This is stuff like, janitorial, HR, accounting. They don't generate their own revenue. They support the revenue divisions. Just like in our college setting here. The revenue generation comes from you guys paying cash. So this is a revenue generating activity. But someone has to empty that trash can to support a proper learning environment for us. While emptying that trash can doesn't generate any revenue, it's supporting my ability to teach you guys in a clean classroom. So what happens is, since they can't generate any revenue of their own, they need to allocate these costs that they incur to the departments that they're supporting. So we can match up costs to make sure we have enough revenue to cover our entire costs. Okay? Now generally, this isn't an internal thing. This isn't, overall the entire company's income and expenses are shown on the income statement as whole. This is more of an internal thing, making sure that we've set prices correctly in these revenue divisions to cover these costs before we get to the end where we're producing these financial statements and going, oh, whoops, we had this bucket of costs we weren't factoring in. So we're going to learn 3 methods of allocating these costs to the revenue divisions. And yes, they increase in complexity as we go along. So we'll look at the easy one first. The easy one's called the direct method. It's going to assign the cost directly to the revenue unit. Okay. That's simple enough. So what we do, this is best shown in the example. S1, and this S2. Then they have 3 production departments or 3 revenue generating departments. We have chocolate chip cookies. These are we'll call production department 1. Other cookies, production 2, and then brownies, production 3. HR incurred $100,000 in costs this period, and janitorial incurred $26,000. Yes, there's some, direct costs that are happening in here, some overhead costs. Yes, we can directly trace those to the individual production departments or allocate them based on overhead allocation. I'm not worried about that. That's the other stuff we've learned. There's a joint process. We've already done this. The thing is now, we got HR that processes all the workers' paperwork in these 3 departments, and we got janitorial that goes and cleans up everything that happens for these 3 departments. And these are the costs they incurred taking care of these 3 departments. And so we got to figure out how to allocate these costs to these departments. The direct method is going to say we have S1, S2, P1, P2, P3. We're going to directly allocate S1's cost to the 3 departments, and we're going to allocate S2's cost to the 3 departments. So we'll look at S1 separately and allocate to the 3. We'll look at S2 separately and allocate to the 3. Direct method. Directly taking these costs and dividing them amongst the 3. How we do that? Well, we have to find some sort of relationship between the services that are provided by HR to the 3 departments. In this case, we're just going to use the hours of service provided. Another thing might be the HR might be the number of employees in each one of these departments. Janitorial may be the square footage of each one of these departments. But keep it simple right now. We're going to use hours of support. So that means, in a little bit better format. So we have our 2 departments, S1, S2. Cost $100,000, $26,000. So what's going on? Well, this is the chart you already have. Well, technically, HR spends 200 hours processing the workers' paperwork of janitorial, 300 hours processing the work for chocolate chip cookies, 400 hours other cookies, and 100 hours in the brownies. So that's how much work that HR did for each one of the departments in the company. Janitorial spent 400 hours cleaning up the HR offices, 200 hours cleaning up the chocolate chip cookie area, 150 on the other cookie area, and 250 on brownies. So for this period, that's what happened. That's where they spent their time. The direct method is going to ignore this. Direct method says, I don't care that janitorial spent 400 hours cleaning up HR. All we care about is that it spent these hours on the production departments. So in that case, we look at S1. Total 300 plus 400 plus 100, that's 800 hours. Look down here, 200 plus 150 plus 250, that's 600 hours. So we're ignoring these. So that means then, well, for the chocolate chip cookies, 3/8 of the total time was spent by HR processing chocolate chip cookies department's paperwork. % of the time was spent on other cookies. 1/8 of the time was spent on the brownies. For janitorial, 1/3 of the time was spent on other cookies or on chocolate chip cookies. Fraction 5, so 3, 2 12, 5/12 of the time on other cookies. And whatever this comes out to be. 250 over 600 of its time on brownies. Well, this is kind of similar to what we've done before. We created a proportion based on, in this case, hours. So in this case, we have $100,000 in cost to divide up amongst the three. So, however you want to enter it in your calculator, round it, whatever. It eventually comes to $37,500 is allocated to chocolate chip cookies. Half the cost is allocated to other cookies. And finally, 1/8 of the cost is allocated to brownies. Of course, there'll be rounding issues here. 7. That's pretty straightforward. Your only complication will be is if I put on there, I have it set up normally, but I tell you the total hours is 1,000. Well, yeah, that's the total hours that actually HR spent. It's just the direct method. You got to take what they spent on janitorial out and recalculate that the total hours in production were 800. So it's only proportion. We're only focused on the hours that are spent in production. It's the direct method. So it's only being directly traced to the 3 production departments. Okay? It ignores what goes on here. Direct method is the easiest method. So you just have to figure out, okay, total hours spent in production. What's then is the individual production department's proportion. Multiply that. We've done that. With the joint cost, similar idea there. Again, it might not be hours, it might be people, it might be square feet. The drawback here. Well, look at janitorial alone. It spent 400 hours on HR. And we're completely ignoring that. We're just focused that. For our next method, tries to get a little bit more into the realism. Of course, adds in layer complexity. The step method. That chart you have is the same for all three methods, so you just have to get your notes. Well, step method. Put that here. Well, the step method is the method that support department cost allocation that allocates some support department costs to other support department costs. Step method. One support department cost is allocated to the other support department and production revenue department. Then remaining support departments are just allocated to production. Something one-way directional cost allocation. Typically, it's going to be the support department that provides the most services to the other support departments. In this case, we only have two. So janitorial provides more support to HR than HR provides to janitorial. To make it easy, on my questions on the exam, I tell you exactly which one is allocating its cost to the other. So it'll be straightforward. So if I say, do the step method and allocating costs, starting with allocating janitorial's cost, they're going to be the one that allocates their cost to everybody, and then HR is only going to allocate the cost to production. So how this picture looks. 1, 2, 1, 2, 2, 3. In this case, janitorial is going to allocate to HR as well as the 3 production departments. HR is going to receive some costs from janitorial for the services provided, then allocate to the 3 service departments. Yes. These both are still going to net out to 0. All the costs will eventually end up here. The only difference is that first we have to allocate janitorial's costs to HR. Okay. So what does that mean? We're going to ignore HR's time spent supporting janitorial, but we're going to keep what janitorial supports HR. So we're going to start with this allocation. So now, 400 plus 200 plus 150 plus 250, that's 1,000. Good? We're ignoring this 200. This is still then the 800 as our base. Starting with allocating this 26,000. %40 of the time is spent. 40% of janitorial time is spent with HR, working on HR. 20% on chocolate chip cookies. 15% on other cookies. 25% on brownies. Times the 26,000. of 26,000 is 10,400. 20% of 26,000, 5,200. 15%, 3,900. 25%, 6,500. Step 1, step method. These are steps involved. Step 1, allocate the support department's cost that provides the most services are the one that I tell you to allocate first. That was janitorial. We allocate janitorial costs first because it's allocated to everybody. If we had 15 support departments, it would be allocated to every one of those along with the production departments. So what this means is this 10,400, it's going to be added to S1's own cost to be allocated out to P1, P2, and P3. As I said, this has to eventually be allocated out so it'll be 0 in S1. If we're putting 10,400 into S1's cost bank, well, we have to take 10,400 out. So now instead of 100,000 allocating, we're going to allocate 110,400 to just the production department. So step 2, take the other support department and allocate their cost to production departments. This 400. So that means in P1, 3/8 of the total cost now that's coming from HR is 41,400. The idea here, still, all total support costs are being allocated to P1, P2, P3. Total it out, it's still going to be 126,000 in total that's being allocated out. The 100,000 plus the 26,000. The only difference here is we're trying to say, okay, well, in order for HR to support these departments, janitorial has to support HR. So we allocate some of the cost to HR, then allocate that back out to the production departments. In reality, okay, it doesn't provide much more accuracy than the direct method, yet it's a little bit more complicated. And again, it's not totally realistic even. Yes, it's supporting, HR being supported by janitorial quite a bit, so it gets a little bit closer to the realism. But it still doesn't reach that total realistic idea. And it's not much more accurate than the direct method, yet it's more complex. So this one doesn't really give you much value. I'm not saying I'm not going to have you do it on the exam, just saying that it doesn't add that much more value because of the level of complexity. So where do we go from there? I'll preview this, we're not going to go all the way. Well, then let's go all the way to realistic. With what we call the reciprocal method. The reciprocal method is going to say, well, yeah, what really happened? Well, HR supports janitorial. Janitorial supports HR, as well as they're each supporting the production department. So the reciprocal method means we're going to allocate simultaneously costs from HR to janitorial, janitorial back to HR, as well as the 3 production departments. This is why you take that algebra class. Because it's a 2, it's simple enough we can do by hand. That's going to be solving for 2 variables, 2 equations. We'll go through that. The next step, though, in your Excel Project 4, which I'll get all copied out for you next week, is going multiple service departments. How do we handle that? Well, that's matrix algebra. I'm not going to have you calculate matrix algebra by hand. Excel does it quite easily. So Excel Project 4, I would say, including time to actually enter all the information, it probably won't take you more than 30 minutes to do. So Excel 4 is fairly easy. Excel is simple. As long as I put a little video up there and you do exactly what you're supposed to do, it instantaneously does it for you. So that one's fairly easy. So next time, we're going to look at solving 2 equations at the same time so that we can simultaneously allocate costs back and forth. And finish this whole thing up. Alright, so I want to show you Mikey. Go back to Mikey and the tasty treat. Remember, I just put it in terms of S1 and E1, trying to keep it simple. It's HR and janitorial, but basically S1 had $160,000 in cost. S2 had $26,000 in cost. S1 provided 200 hours of work to S2, 300 hours to production 1, 400 to production 2, and 100 to production 3. Oh yeah, we're at 160. $400 to S1, 200 to P1, 150, 250. What's going to happen here? We're going to allocate costs from S1 to S2 at the exact same time we're allocating costs from S2 to S1, while we're allocating costs to the production department. In order to do that, we need to know exactly how much cost, when it's all said and done, they're through going back and forth, are being allocated out. We know in total it's 126, but what is the relationship? What's going to be this final number? It's going to have something from S2 to give it a new total, and then S2 is going to get something from S1 to have its new total. So then we can take these percentages and allocate them out. We have to do that by something that's called solving simultaneous equations. As long as it's just 2 support departments is what we'll do. If it's more than 2 support departments, we have to do something called matrix algebra. And that's a little bit difficult by hand, or at least I don't want to teach it to you if you don't know what it is. That's where Excel is going to come in with your Excel project. You don't have to understand what's going on with Make Your Algebra to push the little buttons in Excel to have Excel do it. I don't require you to understand it at all. You just have to go through the motions to do it. But you will understand at least somewhat with our two support departments here. So what we're going to do is say the support department S1 on its own incurred $100,000 in costs, providing services to the other departments. Support department S2 provided 40% of its services to S1. So total support department S1, what this is going to come out as. It has its own $100,000. Plus, it's going to get cost from S2. Well, it's going to get 40% of the cost from S2. You can see 40% here on all these ones. So see, now we're not ignoring anything. We also look at the thousands on the way. So S1, 100,000 from itself, 40% of the total cost from S2 will be allocated to S1. So that's going to be the total cost for S1. Everyone see where I'm getting that from? Zone plus what's going to be allocated to it from S2. So what is S2? So what is this? Well, S2 is its own $26,000 plus what it's going to receive from S1, from HR. Well, HR provided 200 hours to S2 out of the total 1,000. So that's 20% of the total time. So 20% of S1's cost will be allocated to S2. Okay. And if it makes it simpler for you to see equations, change S1 to X and S2 to Y. The book doesn't do that, so you want to be careful. So what we have, two equations, two unknown variables. Somewhere in algebra you may not have paid much attention, but you solved these type of things before. So what you have to do, we need an equation with just one variable, right? That's how you solve. You can't solve a single equation that has two variables. Well, what is x defined as? Well, x is defined in terms of y. So if we take, I'm sure this is the way I do it, so I wasn't confused on my notes. This, because x equals this, into x right there, we'll have an equation of just y's. To and fill in x, 100,000 plus 0.4y. And now, yes, it's not a simple equation, but you can solve it. Just taking your time. 26,000. Let's get rid of the parentheses first. Take the 0.2 and allocate it out. 0.2 times the 100,000. Let's knock some zeros there. Give us 20,000. 50,000. 0.2 times 0.4 will be 0.08 y. Next step in solving equations, get the like terms on one side. So let's get y on this side. So this technically is a 1 in front of the y. Remember that. So we're going to subtract 0.8 y from both sides. Leave us with 0.92 y. 26,000 plus 20,000. 46,000. Need to get y by itself, so we have to divide by 0.92. Y equals $50,000. Y, remember, is S2. This is going to be 50. Now that we've solved and figured out y, we can plug that back in and figure out x. We just have to plug the 50 in here. So we don't have to go through all that to solve for the other side. We just plug in what we just figured out, 50. So 100,000 plus 0.4 times 50,000. Plus 20,000 is 120,000. This will be 120. Then we can allocate out based on these percentages. So 120,000 we'll allocate 24,000 to S2, 36,000 to P1, 48,000 to P2, and 12,000 to P3. Based on the fact we did all of this to figure out what that total cost will be for S1. We then take S2, allocate out its 50,000. This 20,000. $10,000, $7,500, $12,500. So to get this to 50, 26,000 plus 24 is 50,000. 50,000 is allocated out. 100,000 plus 20,000 is 120. Here, 120,000 is allocated out. So when we do all the netting, finally on this side, we will have allocated out 126,000. When it's all said and done. It's just part of it is allocated between these two at the same time. And solve the equations to figure out what that total amount will be when it's all said and done for what S1 is allocating out and what S2 is allocating out. The only reason this is a little difficult is because you got to start remembering some algebra here. Because really, cost allocation side, it's the same thing we've been doing. It's just this time we get to use all of our information for both. And we just have these new numbers based on this little piece we have to do first. Alright? So go back to this problem with Warren LTD and see if you can do reciprocal method for them.